In the dim wood-paneled quiet of a Los Angeles federal courthouse, a secret was buried. One so potentially explosive it could detonate the entire foundation of Blake Lively's defamation case against Justin Baldoni and Wayfarer Studios. Hidden within a sealed court filing, deep inside an emergency motion quietly delivered under heavy redaction, was a phrase that would ultimately undo the very credibility she fought to preserve. I have no evidence that Justin Baldoni or any person at Wayfarer Studios committed the acts I originally described. The courtroom had never heard those words until now, and the timing couldn't be more damning. With the public narrative still largely shaped by Lively's tearful 2023 interview and her strategically timed op-eds, this private admission presents a full-scale contradiction. A bombshell reversal of her own accusations, one that has finally been unearthed through intense legal maneuvering by Baldoni's team and the unrelenting pressure of pretrial discovery. At the heart of this conflict is a legal war that's less about justice and more about celebrity control, power dynamics, and media manipulation. What started as a quiet HR dispute within Wayfarer Studios has now spiraled into a case that's threatening to upend reputations, tear through NDA letters, and expose Hollywood's most private feuds. But behind the high-gloss headlines and viral tweets lies something far more revealing: the intentional strategy used by Lively and her legal advisors to control a narrative they couldn't prove, weaponizing emotional appeal in the absence of hard facts. And now, as multiple insiders come forward, depositions leak, and federal judges push back against sealed motions, the truth is clawing its way to the surface. Let's rewind to where this mess began and how it metastasized into what's now being referred to in legal circles as the Lively collapse. The seeds of this crisis were planted in mid-2022, when Blake Lively, long revered for her poise, intelligence, and ironclad control over her public image, made a confidential complaint to Wayfarer Studios' internal review board. The complaint accused then-executive producer Justin Baldoni of aggressive conduct and inappropriate language during the filming of an unnamed developmental project. At the time, insiders whispered about tension on set, but nothing formal was released. Months passed. Then, in early 2023, an anonymous leak made its way to the New York Times, hinting that a beloved female star was preparing to go public with harassment allegations that would shock the industry. Within 72 hours, Blake Lively's name was trending. Her lawyers quickly confirmed she was involved in a workplace dispute with Wayfarer, but what was notably missing: any public documentation, any hard evidence. And yet, the court of public opinion acted fast. Media outlets ran story after story decrying Baldoni's supposed toxic executive behavior. Even before charges were ever filed, activists applauded Lively's bravery, and powerful agents behind the scenes began quietly severing ties with Wayfarer. It was a textbook example of reputational warfare in the digital age. But while social media crowned her a survivor, the actual court, federal and civil, was still waiting for something concrete. And according to the newly surfaced documents, that something never existed. The turning point came during a sealed deposition conducted in late 2024, when Lively, under oath and away from the cameras, was pressed repeatedly by Baldoni's counsel to identify any written, recorded, or corroborated proof of her allegations. What she said next stunned even her own legal team: "I don't have physical evidence. There were no cameras, no witnesses I can name that would confirm my version. And my recollection is my only reference." The moment was described in a leaked transcript as tense and visibly chaotic. Her lawyers objected multiple times, but the admission remained on record. It's now been formally filed as Exhibit J in a recent motion by Wayfarer to dismiss the civil claims entirely. Brian Friedman, the high-powered attorney representing Baldoni, seized on the quote almost immediately. In his latest filing, he Ms. Lively's own words make clear that her claims, while serious in tone, are unsupported by any material evidence. This is not just a credibility issue. This is a foundational failure of proof that warrants dismissal under both federal and state standards. But the stakes weren't just legal, they were existential. At the same time this confession was quietly filed, Blake's team launched a PR offensive: carefully timed op-eds, coordinated Instagram posts, and red carpet appearances designed to reassert her status as a woman under siege. The media followed suit, largely ignoring the mounting contradictions, and instead focusing on celebrity allies like Taylor Swift, who issued vague statements about supporting brave voices in every industry. Yet behind the scenes, cracks were forming. Sources close to Taylor Swift's camp now admit that the singer was blindsided by Blake's legal maneuvers, especially after learning that her private text messages were included in discovery requests. messages Blake's lawyers initially fought to suppress, only to later concede under judicial pressure, one insider told Deadline. Taylor felt like she was dragged into this for optics. When it became clear that she might have to testify or be deposed, she hit the brakes. That distancing may be one of the clearest signs yet that Lively is losing ground, not only in court but within her once loyal celebrity circle. This unfolding mess has caught the attention of several Hollywood legal giants, some of whom are now calling this case a potential landmark in celebrity defamation liability. One former studio legal executive, speaking on background, framed it this way: "It's not just that she can't prove what she said, it's that she knew she couldn't prove it, and still moved forward with public accusations that damaged careers and cost people millions. That's legally dangerous and professionally radioactive." Wayfarer Studios, now partially owned by a consortium of independent financiers, is reportedly preparing to file a counterclaim seeking damages exceeding $80 million, citing reputational harm, project losses, and talent departures directly traceable to Lively's false accusations. In response, Blake Lively's legal team has doubled down, attempting to block the release of further deposition videos, seeking protective orders, and hinting at potential appeals. Anything to delay what now looks like a slow-motion public collapse, the Hollywood House of Cards. While Blake Lively's legal team scrambled to contain the damage of her sworn admission, Wayfarer Studios was already mobilizing behind the scenes. Confidential memos reveal that, just days after Lively's admission was entered into the record, Wayfarer's legal counsel quietly convened with major streaming partners, production houses, and financiers to shore up support not just for the company's reputation, but for its ongoing business viability. Executives at Apple TV Plus and Amazon Studios, both of whom were reportedly exploring partnerships with Wayfarer in late 2023, had backed away from the table after Lively's accusations went public. According to one internal report, the Lively matter was cited as a top concern in talent retention and brand alignment. But now, with the truth emerging, those same execs were re-engaging. And why? Because the narrative was shifting. One insider described it best: "When Blake made her original statements, everyone hit pause out of caution. But when the no evidence quote hit internal wires, you could feel the tide turn. The fear wasn't of her it was of being caught on the wrong side of a PR lie." Meanwhile, the judge overseeing the case had grown increasingly impatient with Blake's camp. In a rare public reprimand issued in January 2025, the court criticized her attorneys for what it called a pattern of obfuscation, delay, and inconsistent representations. In one striking passage, the judge noted, "The plaintiff cannot continue to seek the court's protection while actively shaping public discourse through coordinated media campaigns. One either litigates in court or in the press. Not both." It was a clear rebuke of Lively's PR-first approach, and a signal that the court would no longer tolerate her dual-track strategy. But what was most damning wasn't just her lack of evidence. It was what she did have, and still chose to conceal. Court filings revealed that multiple early emails from Lively's own representatives contradicted the narrative she later presented publicly. In one email to her agent, just 3 days after the alleged incident with Baldoni, Lively described the situation as uncomfortable but nothing I want to make formal. She added, "I don't want to burn bridges over this. I just want to move on." This email, submitted as Exhibit K, clashed directly with her later interviews in which she claimed she felt physically threatened, emotionally manipulated, and silenced by a toxic male executive. That contradiction formed the basis of a supplemental motion by Wayfarer's attorneys, who argued this plaintiff cannot create retroactive trauma for litigation convenience. Her own words, contemporaneous and clear, reveal a completely different emotional response, one that undermines her entire claim more than anything else. This emerging paper trail has begun to chip away at the image Blake Lively built for herself so carefully over the past decade, that of a poised, principled, and above-reproach artist and mother. And then came the Wayfarer countersuit, in a stunning reversal. The studio filed a massive $80 million defamation and tortious interference complaint, citing not just damage to their brand but the deliberate sabotage of multiple productions, including a miniseries Lively was attached to co-produce. Their argument that Blake's public accusations issued without evidence, in contradiction of her own internal statements, had led directly to the withdrawal of major streaming partners, the shutdown of 2 development slates, the loss of at least 4 lead actors, the mass resignation of 2 producers, a multi-million-dollar advertising campaign, cancellation from a beauty brand tied to Lively, and then came the receipts. In support of their case, Wayfarer's legal team released a redacted internal Slack thread from 2023, where several junior staff members discussed Blake Lively's press statements in real time. One message from a production coordinator read, "This is so messed up. She told me this wasn't serious and that she just wanted to get ahead of a narrative." Another responded, "The guy Baldoni barely spoke to her on set. She wouldn't take a note. She shut down every conversation. These leaked communications, though not formally submitted into the record, have circulated heavily among industry circles, triggering a broader conversation about celebrity accountability in the Me Too era. Because if Blake Lively could manipulate a claim, launch a global media offensive, and bring down an entire company without evidence, what does that say about due process in Hollywood?" Taylor Swift, once seen as Blake's closest ally, has reportedly begun distancing herself in earnest. Sources close to the singer suggest that her legal team advised her to withdraw from any further engagement, particularly after subpoenas for private communications were greenlit in spring 2025. Insiders familiar with the discovery process say that Taylor's text exchanges with Blake, which Blake tried to suppress, include multiple contradictions of Blake's public timeline, and even show Swift advising caution about going public. In one reported message, Swift allegedly wrote, "You have to be sure, this could destroy lives if you're wrong." That line alone has now appeared in multiple speculative editorials questioning the legitimacy of Lively's original claim, and Taylor isn't the only one pulling back. Reynolds, once Blake's most vocal public supporter, has remained notably silent during this phase of the litigation. Gone are the joint statements and Instagram quips. In their place, silence, strategic. Telling silence, one longtime Hollywood PR consultant put it bluntly. When Taylor and Ryan both go dark at the same time, it's because something serious happened, and it's not good for Blake. Even former defenders of Lively have begun to hedge. A former Vogue editor who previously ran a fawning profile of Lively in 2022 recently posted a thinly veiled tweet, "Never confuse press mastery with truth-telling. The best liars always know the power of lighting and language," and in online forums, podcast panels, and celebrity Reddit threads, the tide has turned dramatically. Where once Lively was seen as a righteous victim of executive overreach, she's now being painted as the poster child for what happens when PR spins too far from the facts. But there's one final detail in this phase of the fallout that can't be ignored. A new court filing reveals that Blake Lively, through her attorneys, attempted to negotiate a private settlement with Wayfarer as early as March 2024. Months before her public accusations intensified, the proposed agreement that she would walk away quietly, declined to participate in further press, and agreed to a non-disparagement clause. Wayfarer rejected the offer, their reasoning, according to internal memos, "We will not be bullied into reputational extinction." That decision set the stage for what we now see, a full-blown, high-stakes, mutually assured destruction scenario playing out in real time, with the eyes of the industry fixed on every motion, memo, and mistake. The conversations surrounding Blake Lively's lawsuit had fundamentally changed. Once seen as the brave whistleblower stepping forward against a male-dominated production culture, she was now on the defensive, desperately attempting to hold onto a version of the truth that was unraveling with every new disclosure. The admission that she had no evidence was just the beginning. Multiple sources close to the court proceedings have confirmed that several of Blake's earlier claims, not only about Justin Baldoni but also about the structure and culture of Wayfarer Studios, have either been debunked or directly contradicted by contemporaneous records. For example, Blake had publicly stated that Baldoni created a hostile and gendered work environment on set and claimed she had no creative control, despite being a credited co-producer. But internal production notes from the show in question, now unsealed, reveal the exact opposite. Lively had final script approval, veto power over key crew hires, and was described in studio emails as being fully involved in all major creative decisions. In fact, in one February 2023 message, a junior executive wrote, "Blake is overstepping again. She wants rewrites, but it's literally day 3 of shooting." Justin tried to push back, but she shut him down. The studio's logs showed that Blake was calling the shots, not being shut out, and that further undermined her central narrative of being silenced and sidelined. Wayfarer's attorneys pounced. In a fiery supplemental brief, they argued, Ms. Lively's claims of exclusion are disproven by documents showing she wielded disproportionate power throughout pre-production. Her claims are not only unsupported, they're provably false. The implications were staggering. Blake wasn't the disempowered victim she claimed to be. She was, in many ways, the dominant force on set, and the backlash she faced may have stemmed more from her own behavior than any alleged misconduct from Baldoni. More contradictions continue to emerge, many of them tied to text message logs, emails, and production notes forcibly disclosed through discovery after the court ruled against Blake's multiple motions to seal them. Among the most damning revelations, a text from Blake to her manager dated August 18, 2023. "I'm not sure it was that bad, but I can't look like I backed down, we're past that point." An internal email from her attorney to a PR firm outlining a media rollout strategy before any formal complaint had been filed. "We want her statement to drop just before the NYT feature hits. If we control the conversation first, Wayfarer can't outpace us." A private Instagram message from Blake to a fellow actress: "I can't lose, either I win in court or I walk away a martyr." The court has not ruled on whether all of these messages will be admissible at trial, but just their existence has already shifted the legal and cultural tide. In the court of public opinion, Blake Lively's team has struggled to keep pace with the narrative's collapse. Her usual army of media defenders, fashion outlets, lifestyle editors, and soft-focused profile writers have gone quiet. Even Vanity Fair, which once dubbed her Hollywood's last standing angel, has reportedly shelved a glowing cover story meant to coincide with the release of her next film. One editor allegedly told a colleague, "We can't run Puff if the foundation is rotten." And while Blake's publicists have continued issuing statements about her commitment to truth and accountability, their words increasingly ring hollow when placed alongside the mounting record of contradictions. Meanwhile, Justin Baldoni has adopted a measured but forceful strategy. Far from gloating, he's kept public statements to a minimum, allowing court documents and filings to do the talking. But those documents are telling, and they paint a picture of a man who was, in fact, trying to de-escalate the situation from the very beginning. One of the most compelling documents comes in the form of a mediation transcript from April 2023, in which Baldoni reportedly told Blake, "I respect your voice. I just wish we could have worked this out face-to-face instead of with headlines." That comment was omitted from every public summary released by Blake's team. But in the context of everything else we now know, her lack of evidence, her contradictory messages, her behind-the-scenes maneuvering, it feels like a stunning omission. Then came the public betrayal within her own camp. Two of Blake's former assistants, initially bound by confidentiality clauses, were granted waivers by the court and have since testified in sealed depositions that they were told to find anything that could make Justin look difficult. They were instructed to coordinate with press contacts without attribution. They were warned to never mention internal documents that painted Blake as unstable or controlling. One assistant reportedly submitted a signed affidavit stating, "The media rollout was planned like a film premiere. There were deadlines, talking points, and storyboards. None of it felt like someone just telling their truth. It felt like we were manufacturing one." That line, now circulating heavily on social media, has ignited fierce backlash from the public and industry alike. Podcasts, reaction videos, and even mainstream television hosts have begun dissecting the difference between real victimhood and orchestrated scandal. The central question: if a celebrity can fabricate a crisis, control the headlines, and walk away unpunished even when the truth comes out, what does that say about justice in Hollywood? Blake's legal team has shifted strategy in recent weeks, reportedly preparing to argue that even if her claims were exaggerated or unprovable, her emotional experience was still valid, and thus, the lawsuit should not be dismissed. Legal experts are deeply skeptical. In a recent legal roundtable, former federal prosecutor Dana Littman explained, "Feelings don't win lawsuits, evidence does." And what we have here is a plaintiff who admitted, under oath, that she has none. Some legal analysts even speculate that Blake's attorneys are now privately negotiating a quiet withdrawal of the lawsuit in exchange for Wayfarer dropping its counterclaims, but only if Wayfarer agrees to no admission of wrongdoing. So far, Baldoni's team has refused. They want vindication not just for their client, but for the broader principle that false accusations, no matter how glamorous the accuser, come with consequences. Deposing the elite. The Hollywood witness list explodes as Blake Lively's legal position weakened. Justin Baldoni's attorneys began preparing an unexpected but strategically devastating move. An expansive witness list featuring some of the biggest names in Blake's inner circle and beyond. Among the names rumored to be subpoenaed or formally requested for depositions were Taylor Swift, Ryan Reynolds, Gigi Hadid, Zoe Kravitz, and even members of the production crew from multiple Wayfarer-affiliated projects. The strategy was simple: expose the gap between public loyalty and private truth by calling those closest to Blake, people who'd been on set, exchanged texts, or participated in media planning. Wayfarer's team hoped to prove there was never a genuine belief in the claims Blake was making. Instead, they aimed to show that the entire operation had been a reputational ambush cloaked in activism. Early returns suggested it might work. One former Wayfarer casting director in her deposition stated, "There was a sense that Blake wanted to reshape the narrative of that entire production. She would contradict herself from day to day. One day she'd say Justin was inappropriate. The next day, she'd joke about how she'd won that scene by outmaneuvering him in front of crew." Another producer, testifying under oath, claimed that she came in with her own PR handler. "Who does that? She didn't treat it like a job, she treated it like a chess game." That framing Blake as manipulator, not victim, gained traction in the public discourse. TikToks went viral deconstructing her past interviews for inconsistencies. Podcast hosts resurfaced footage of her contradicting herself on multiple press tours. One damning mashup video titled "Queen of Contradictions: The Blake Lively Files" racked up over 9 million views in a week. But the most intense scrutiny came after text messages between Blake and Taylor Swift were finally disclosed in part. Thanks to a judge's order overriding Blake's emergency motion to suppress them. While much of the content remained sealed under privacy protections, key excerpts were enough to shift public sentiment again. One message from Taylor, sent shortly before the accusations went public, read, "B, I support you no matter what. But this doesn't sound like what you told me last fall. What changed?" Another message from Blake, now infamous. Replied, "It's not about what happened, it's about who gets to tell the story first." That line set the internet on fire. Media analysts called it the Rosetta Stone of the entire scandal. It revealed what many had long suspected, that the issue wasn't so much a factual complaint as it was a strategic media narrative, carefully engineered to position Blake as both a victim and a hero. Regardless of the underlying truth, with Taylor now effectively neutralized, her messages used against Blake rather than in her defense, attention turned to Reynolds. As Blake's husband and one of the most powerful comedic voices in Hollywood, Reynolds had long been seen as her staunchest defender. But new information revealed that even Ryan had privately urged Blake to walk away from the lawsuit. Months before it exploded, in a confidential memo submitted to the court under seal, Reynolds reportedly wrote to one of Blake's attorneys, "If this becomes public and we don't have hard proof, this will follow her forever. The court doesn't care how loved she is, they care what can be proved." Though he has refused public comment, sources close to the Reynolds camp now say he's focused entirely on distancing himself from the case. Their joint brand, once a media darling for its humor and family-centered image, has all but disappeared from public view. And that silence speaks volumes. Behind the scenes, Wayfarer Studios was gaining momentum. Production resumed on to previously stalled projects. Baldoni announced a new directing gig with a major streamer, and whispers circulated that the company had secured an exclusive development deal, partially as a result of sympathy from executives who had watched their handling of the Lively matter with measured restraint. A surprising number of industry professionals, particularly women, began quietly signaling their support for Baldoni, not out of allegiance, but out of frustration with how Blake had hijacked a serious cause for personal branding. One anonymous female director told Hollywood Insider, "When someone lies, or exaggerates, or bends reality for publicity, it hurts everyone. It makes it that much harder for real victims to be believed. That's the damage she's doing." That sentiment found its way into headlines, op-eds, and industry panels. Suddenly, Blake wasn't the symbol of courage, she was the cautionary tale. In a surprising late May twist, the court authorized limited public release of sealed exhibits, including excerpts from the original confidential HR investigation within Wayfarer Studios. These excerpts revealed that the internal team found no actionable misconduct, no witness corroboration of any hostile behavior, mutual tensions between talent and executive over creative direction. The final note from the HR report stated, "While the working relationship was strained, there is insufficient basis to substantiate claims of harassment or misconduct by Mr. Baldoni." That sealed the narrative in legal terms. It dismantled Blake's entire basis for her defamation claim. In public terms, it signaled that she had spent nearly 2 years waging war against a man, a studio, and an ecosystem, on the basis of nothing more than conflicting feelings and curated headlines. And yet, Blake's team isn't giving up. In an emergency brief filed just days after the HR report was released, her attorneys now argue that the absence of evidence does not equate to the absence of harm. They are now shifting toward a trauma-based defense, one that leans heavily on the lived experience model of modern litigation. A strategy that emphasizes subjective truth and emotional resonance over factual substantiation. Critics have lambasted the move as an act of desperation. A retired judge on Court Watch Live remarked, "It's rare to see a case pivot this hard, this late. It's a signal. They know they can't win on the facts, so they're trying to win on feelings." But in a federal court, especially one that has already chastised the plaintiff for inconsistent filings, sealed motions, and narrative manipulation, the odds of that approach succeeding appear slim. As the case barrels toward trial, tentatively scheduled for late 2025, the stakes couldn't be higher for Wayfarer Studios. Exoneration or extinction for Justin Baldoni, vindication or lasting stigma for Blake Lively, everything, because if the court ultimately rules that her claims were baseless, manipulated, or knowingly false, she could face not just the dismissal of her lawsuit but a career-killing judgment in the form of Wayfarer's $80 million counterclaim. A fall from grace of that scale wouldn't just damage her, it would become a Hollywood parable, told for years to come. The media fracture and Blake's PR nightmare. As court filings mounted and Blake Lively's "I have no evidence" quote took on viral notoriety, her once sympathetic media machine began to fracture. The glossy coverage, the red carpet applause, the Vogue exclusives, the morning show empathy dried up almost overnight, and in its place came something Blake was not prepared for: industry silence and editorial abandonment. Publicists across Hollywood refer to it as the frost. It's what happens when a client is deemed too controversial, too high risk, or worse, too dishonest to defend. And Blake, for all her charm and strategic brand building, was now a frostbite case. What was once a tightly controlled PR operation had spiraled into a crisis that no amount of image polishing could contain. PR firms that had previously collaborated with Lively's team began ghosting them. Exclusive profiles were postponed indefinitely. Even media allies who had historically aligned with the actress's feminist persona began to question the ethics of covering her at all. One senior editor at a major entertainment magazine put it this way: "We champion victims, but when the facts turn and the victim narrative starts to look manufactured, our credibility's on the line, too." The timing couldn't have been worse for Blake. She had multiple projects in post-production, brand partnerships pending renewal, and a scheduled appearance at Cannes meant to debut her directorial short. All of it hung in limbo, and one by one they started falling apart. Her Cannes appearance was quietly cancelled. A luxury skincare brand announced it was reevaluating ambassador commitments, and one high-profile film, originally backed by Netflix, was reportedly shelved indefinitely. Insiders familiar with the studio's reasoning say it wasn't just about Blake's legal woes. It was about audience reaction. Viewer sentiment was tanking. Focus group data had shown a dramatic shift, where audiences once associated Lively with elegance, intelligence, and relatability. She was now being described as manipulative, untrustworthy, and inauthentic. In a desperate move, Blake's team attempted a PR pivot. A last-minute sit-down interview was booked with a high-profile journalist known for grunting image correction pieces. The goal: recenter the narrative, push the emotional storyline, present Blake as someone caught in the crossfire of her own trauma, rather than the architect of her downfall. But the interview, sources say, never aired. Why? Because when the journalist asked whether she stood by her sworn deposition, her admission that she had no evidence, Blake allegedly stumbled. She said, on camera, "I meant no physical evidence, but there are different kinds of truth." That clip leaked before it could be scrubbed. It was enough to confirm what critics had long suspected. Blake was leaning fully into post-truth storytelling, hoping that emotional resonance would outweigh legal and factual accountability. Unfortunately for her, the court didn't agree, and neither did the public. Across digital platforms, Blake Lively became the center of parody, backlash, and analytical deconstruction. Twitter threads dissected her earlier op-eds for inconsistencies. TikToks mocked her red carpet remarks as Oscar-caliber performances. Podcasters began debating the ethics of believing all women when some women lie strategically. A particularly damning YouTube expose titled "Blake's Empire of Influence: How Hollywood Collapsed Under One Woman's Lie" reached 12 million views in a week. It featured voiceovers reading Blake's private texts over slow zooms on court documents, intercut with media clips from her earlier feminist speeches. It was slick, it was brutal, and it was devastatingly effective. Meanwhile, Wayfarer Studios saw a stunning reputational rebound. Public sympathy, once cautiously withheld, now began flowing back toward the company and toward Justin Baldoni. His response to the crisis was widely praised: calm, respectful, and grounded in transparency. He released one brief statement, the only public comment he's made since Blake's suit began. I've always believed in creating safe spaces for artists, collaborators, and communities. I never wanted to fight publicly, but I will defend my name when the facts demand it. That statement was shared tens of thousands of times. It made its way into op-eds about corporate culture, artistic integrity, and what it means to balance justice with accountability. Even more telling, Baldoni was quietly invited to speak on several panels about conflict resolution in creative spaces, events where Blake was originally meant to appear. Her seat had been replaced by his. Within Hollywood, an uncomfortable question began circulating. Did Blake believe her own story? Or was she simply managing a losing hand from the start? Some insiders, including former publicists and on-set collaborators, have begun to answer that question in public. On background in interviews and via social media leaks, one longtime industry communications strategist said, "Blake is smart, exceptionally smart. She knows how narratives work, she knows what buttons to press, and when. The problem here is that she pressed them too early, before checking whether the floor beneath her was solid, and that, ultimately, may be the fatal flaw in Blake Lively's strategy. She launched her campaign before confirming that it could survive the scrutiny she herself demanded." Even her former allies began to fracture. Gigi Hadid, once a consistent presence on Blake's Instagram feed and red carpet dates, unfollowed her quietly. Twice, Zoe Kravitz, asked on a podcast whether she still stood by Blake, dodged the question entirely and pivoted to talking about Taylor Swift instead. And while Taylor has said nothing publicly since the text messages leaked, she has been spotted in multiple recent public appearances with Justin Baldoni's wife, Emily, a clear sign that allegiances have shifted. This is the part of the story no one tells you. When reputations collapse, they don't fall in silence, they fall with echoes, reposts, unfollows, strategic absences, and in Blake Lively's case, the silence was deafening. But perhaps the most profound fracture came when her own legal team, exhausted by months of damage control and contradictory filings, began leaking frustrations to trusted journalists off the record. One damning quote from a senior associate reportedly appeared in a legal blog. "We built our argument around what we were told, but once the facts started shifting, we were chasing a ghost. Every new leak undercut what we said the week before. And when a legal team starts hinting that their client was not entirely forthcoming, that's not just a red flag, that's a white flag. The legal aftershock, accountability on trial." By the summer of 2025, the case of Blake Lively versus Wayfarer Studios had evolved beyond a typical civil dispute. It was no longer just about reputational harm, defamation claims, or one actress's career. It had become a referendum on the power of image versus truth in Hollywood. And at the center of it all was a courtroom transcript that refused to disappear. "I have no evidence that Justin Baldoni or Wayfarer Studios committed the acts I described." That line, delivered under oath, was being cited in legal textbooks, debated by ethics professors, and even quoted by attorneys in completely unrelated cases. It was shorthand for what legal analysts began calling performative allegation syndrome, when a public accusation, elevated by celebrity status and media framing, is unsupported by hard proof but devastatingly effective nonetheless. Wayfarer's $80 million countersuit now had wind in its sails. The company wasn't just defending itself, they were turning the tables. Their attorneys had filed a revised claim, arguing not only defamation but intentional infliction of reputational harm and negligent misrepresentation to media entities. The logic was clear. If Blake had knowingly made false or misleading statements that caused investors to back out, talent to walk away, and multiple projects to collapse, then she owed far more than an apology. She owed restitution. Blake's defense team, by now operating under extreme pressure and growing public cynicism, shifted tactics again. Their latest court strategy focused on Blake's mental health, claiming that her perception of events had been shaped by emotional exhaustion, industry burnout, and postpartum vulnerability. They submitted a declaration from a licensed therapist who had seen Blake on and off during the relevant time frame. The therapist's statement emphasized Ms. Lively's subjective emotional state was one of fear, confusion, and suppressed trauma. Whether or not the events happened as described, they were very real to her in the moment. But the court was not moved. In a rare judicial commentary included with the decision to allow Wayfarer's amended countersuit, the judge wrote, "Feelings, however sincerely held, cannot be used to justify false statements that result in reputational or financial harm to others. This court does not criminalize emotion, but neither will it ignore facts." That ruling marked a major turning point. For the first time, It became clear that Blake Lively wasn't just in danger of losing her case, she was now at risk of losing millions, potentially more than her net worth could sustain without liquidating assets or dissolving business ventures. By late July, rumors swirled that Blake had entered confidential mediation, attempting to settle with Wayfarer privately in exchange for a non-disclosure agreement and financial compromise. Multiple sources confirmed she offered a public apology in draft form, suggesting language such as, "I acknowledge that aspects of my experience were miscommunicated, and I regret the impact that had on individuals and organizations involved." But Wayfarer rejected it. The studio's board of directors, reportedly guided by Baldoni's lead counsel Brian Friedman, insisted on a full acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Not just regret, they demanded she state explicitly, "I falsely accused Justin Baldoni and Wayfarer Studios of misconduct, and I accept responsibility for the harm caused by those accusations." That language was a red line for Blake. She walked away from the negotiation. But the damage continued. And not just to her wallet. Behind the scenes, Blake's production company was beginning to hemorrhage. Investors were backing out. Branded sponsors were invoking morality clauses to terminate deals. Her long-in-development adaptation of a best-selling novel lost its showrunner, and a script that had once been in the running for major festival funding was quietly removed from all pitch decks, according to one film executive. "No one wants to be the studio that bankrolls her comeback," one agent said. "Not until this lawsuit ends, and maybe not even then." Meanwhile, Baldoni's position only strengthened. Industry figures who had previously distanced themselves out of caution began speaking publicly in support of him. One notable voice was Ava DuVernay, who tweeted, "Accountability works both ways. False accusations aren't activism, they're sabotage." The tweet sparked a wave of support for Baldoni and Wayfarer Studios, particularly from artists and executives who had previously avoided commenting. Suddenly, the conversation was reframed again, not as a he said, she said, but as a broader reckoning with celebrity manipulation, media opportunism, and weaponized storytelling. And as the pressure mounted, cracks began to appear within Blake's inner circle. A former assistant filed a petition with the court to nullify her NDA, citing public interest exceptions. The assistant claimed she had direct knowledge of the plan to go public with the accusations against Baldoni before any formal complaint was filed. The filing read, "I was part of email chains and voice memo discussions in which the language and timing of Blake's accusations were discussed as strategic steps, not reflections of actual fear or harm." If the petition is granted, the assistant's testimony could prove catastrophic, not just for Blake's legal standing but for her entire reputation. Because once her own team begins testifying under oath that her allegations were performative, coordinated, and detached from fact, the entire house of cards comes tumbling down. In another sign of isolation, Ryan Reynolds quietly offloaded joint business interests he held with Blake. Two sources confirmed he so.